The laughter stopped, like someone had cut the power. For a moment no one moved. The studio lights still burned bright, but the warmth in the room was gone, replaced by an uneasy quiet that felt almost sacred. On one side of the desk, Jimmy Kimmel sat frozen, half smile lingering like he wasn't sure whether to keep playing the host or start apologizing. Across from him, Mark Wahlberg leaned forward, calm but unflinching, his eyes steady beneath the glare. The tension wasn't loud, it was still. The kind of stillness that carries more power than shouting ever could. Seconds ago, it had been all laughter. A few playful jabs, a harmless joke about Mark's faith and his film, or so Jimmy thought. But something in Wahlberg's expression shifted. The crowd sensed it before he even spoke. Faith's not a punchline. "Jimmy," he said, quiet but clear. You could almost hear the air leave the room. Even the band in the corner seemed unsure whether to keep smiling. A producer's voice cracked faintly over the intercom, cut to wide shot. Jimmy blinked, trying to recover. "Hey, I was just kidding, buddy." But the damage was done. Wahlberg leaned back, eyes never leaving Kimmel. The room wasn't just watching a celebrity interview anymore. It was witnessing a confrontation between conviction and comedy, belief and bravado. He reached for his mic, unclipped it slowly, and placed it on the table. The metallic click echoed across the studio. Then, without another word, he stood. A murmur rippled through the audience, gasps, whispers, the rustle of phones being raised. Mark gave a small nod to the crowd. "Thanks, everybody," he said, voice steady, most gentle. And then he walked off. Jimmy sat frozen, his grin gone, his cue cards useless. But what led to this moment, and what happened next, would leave the entire industry in disbelief. Hours before the cameras rolled, the atmosphere backstage at Jimmy Kimmel Live was already strange, that jittery mix of Hollywood charm and quiet calculation. Assistants darted through the corridors, clutching cue cards and coffee cups. While a makeup artist gave Mark Wahlberg one final touch-up, Mark sat patiently, scrolling his phone, half listening to the chatter around him. He wasn't nervous. Not really. He'd done hundreds of interviews before. But tonight felt different. He was here to promote his new film, one deeply personal, a story about faith, redemption, and the American spirit. To him, it wasn't just another blockbuster. It was a message. Meanwhile, in the control room, Jimmy's producers were buzzing. "Let's keep it light," one said. "Crack a joke early. He's a serious guy. Loosen him up." They didn't mean harm. They just knew the formula. Tease the tough guy. Make him laugh. Turn it into viral gold. But somewhere between light and laughable, the line got blurred. When Jimmy greeted Mark in the green room before the show, the tone was playful until a single offhand remark landed wrong. A half-joke about Hollywood saints and muscle-bound redemption arcs. Jimmy laughed. A few others did too. Mark smiled politely, but behind that smile, something flickered. He'd been mocked before his past, his faith, his convictions. But tonight, it hit differently. Maybe it was the setting. Maybe it was the irony of it all. Talking about faith in a place where authenticity was often scripted, he brushed it off, as he always did. But as the stage manager called, "We're livin' 5," Mark felt that unease return, a faint warning in his gut. He thought it was just another interview, until one joke crossed a line that couldn't be uncrossed. To the world. Jimmy Kimmel was untouchable, the king of late night. The man who could make senators squirm and celebrities blush, all with the same grin. He'd built a brand on balance, just edgy enough to seem fearless, just likable enough to stay adored. But behind that smooth delivery was a performer who thrived on control. Every laugh was earned, every silence choreographed. In Hollywood, Kimmel wasn't just a comedian. He was a conductor, orchestrating comfort and discomfort with equal precision. Still, there was a side of him the audience never saw, the quiet tension of maintaining the mask, the burden of always having to be clever, never vulnerable, the unspoken rule, the joke must always land, even if someone has to take the hit. And tonight that someone was Mark Wahlberg. Jimmy had heard the warnings. His producers knew Wahlberg's interviews could turn serious fast. Keep it playful, they said. Don't go deep. He's not Fallon. The temptation was too strong. Wahlberg's transformation from bad boy rapper to faith-driven actor made perfect late-night material, redemption wrapped in irony. The perfect setup. So when Jimmy took his seat under the lights, script cards stacked neatly, he already knew where he wanted the laughs to land. The problem? He forgot that not every man laughs at himself the same way. To Jimmy, the show was a stage 2 mark. It was a test of respect, that subtle arrogance. The kind that comes from being untouchable too long, crept into Jimmy's tone that night. Just one smirk too wide. One joke too sharp, and that was all it took. Because in a world built on laughter, nothing is more dangerous than the moment the laughter stops. Long before the bright lights and box office hits, Mark Wahlberg was just a kid from Dorchester, one of 9 children in a working-class Boston family. The streets taught him how to fight, how to survive, and how quickly a single mistake could define your life. By his late teens, he'd made more than a few. Fights, arrests, headlines, the kind of chaos that chews people up and spits them out. But where most stories end in shame, Wahlberg's began in reflection. Somewhere between the noise and the silence of those early years, he found something that would change everything. Faith. Not the Hollywood kind. The quiet kind. The kind that asks you to look in the mirror and start again. That discovery didn't make his path easier. It made it harder. Every success came with scrutiny. Every role with a reminder of who he once was. But Mark carried that weight differently. He didn't run from it, he used it. The discipline of the gym, the devotion to his family, the early morning prayers before the world even woke, they weren't habits. They were redemption in motion. When he spoke about second chances, people listened. Not because he preached it, but because he lived it. That was the man who walked onto Jimmy Kimmel's stage that night. A man who'd built his life on humility, on the belief that grace could rewrite even the darkest chapter. So, the jokes started, the subtle digs at his transformation, the smirks about his faith, something deeper stirred. He wasn't just a guest being teased. He was a man watching years of hard-won growth turned into punchlines. He stayed calm, as he always did. But beneath that calm was a fire that had burned for decades, the kind that doesn't explode. It erupts. And under those studio lights, that eruption was only moments away. The clock above the camera blinked 9:59 p.m., the red tally light turned on, and a voice boomed through the studio speakers. We're live in 3, 2, 1. Applause thundered as the familiar late-night intro music hit. Jimmy Kimmel walked out, waving to the crowd, that signature confidence radiating from every step. He delivered his opening monologue, crisp, practiced, perfect. The jokes landed. The crowd was warm. Everything was right on schedule. Then, it was time for the guest. Ladies and gentlemen, Jimmy announced with a grin, please welcome the one and only Mark Wahlberg. The audience erupted. Mark stepped out, wearing that trademark half-smile, humble, grounded, effortlessly charismatic. He shook Jimmy's hand, nodded to the crowd, and took his seat. Cameras zoomed in. The banter began. At first it was easy. Talk about his new film, the training, the early mornings. Mark laughed, relaxed, shared a few stories. But then Jimmy leaned back, smirking just slightly, and tossed out a line that wasn't in the cue cards. So, Mark, when do you sleep? Or do you just pray through it? A ripple of laughter from the audience. Light, nervous, Mark smiled, polite, unbothered on the surface. I sleep fine, he said softly. Faith helps with that, Amy chuckled. Yeah, you're probably the only guy in Hollywood who starts the day with a rosary instead of a protein shake. More laughter. But this time, it lingered. Awkward, uncertain. Something shifted in Mark's posture. His gaze fixed on Jimmy, not angry, but piercing, focused. You could feel the crowd's energy tighten. For a moment, the two men just looked at each other, a comedian waiting for a laugh, and a man deciding whether to give one. And in that stillness, something cracked, the moment where politeness ends and truth begins. The studio lights seemed brighter now, almost too bright. The laughter that had filled the room minutes earlier felt miles away. Jimmy Kimmel shuffled his cards, trying to recover the rhythm. The energy had shifted beyond repair. He leaned forward, trying to lighten the air. "Come on, Mark, you know I'm just messing with you," he said, voice half joking, half pleading. Mark didn't respond right away. He looked down at the desk between them, the glossy wood reflecting the glare of the cameras, then back up, expression calm but unwavering. "There's joking," he said quietly, "and then there's disrespect." The audience went still. Even the cameramen hesitated to move their lenses. Jimmy tried to laugh it off. "Hey, it's a comedy show. Everyone's fair game here." Mark tilted his head slightly. "Maybe that's the problem," he replied. "You think decency's a punchline?" The line hit harder than any shout could have. It wasn't anger, it was conviction. You could feel the crowd's mood turn, some shifting uncomfortably in their seats. Others nodding before they realized they were nodding. Jimmy blinked, stunned. "You're really walking out over a joke?" Mark sighed, unclipping his microphone. The metallic click echoed through the silence. He set it gently on the desk, stood up, and looked toward the crowd. Not at Jimmy, not at the cameras, but at the people watching. "I came here to talk about faith and hard work," he said, voice steady. "If that's funny to you, that's on you." Then he nodded, simple, respectful. Final and turned to walk off the stage. A few claps broke out from the audience, hesitant at first, then growing until the applause drowned out the awkward hum of the band. Jimmy sat frozen, cue cards limp in his hands, and within minutes the clip would spread like wildfire, sparking a cultural storm no one saw coming. The moment Mark Wahlberg walked off that stage, the world took a breath, and then the internet exploded. Within minutes, clips of the confrontation flooded social media. One fan's phone recording hit 1 million views before midnight. The hashtags came next. Hashtag Wahlberg walks out. Hashtag faith over fame. Hashtag respect over ratings. Twitter was chaos. Half the posts praised him. Finally, someone in Hollywood stands up for something real. Others mocked him. It's a joke. Mark, lighten up. But everyone, everywhere, was talking. YouTube lit up with reaction videos. Commentators replayed the clip frame by frame. The silence, the stare, the moment Jimmy's grin faded. You can actually see when he realizes he's gone too far, one said. Entertainment. News anchors called it the most uncomfortable moment in late night history. Talk radio called it a cultural reckoning, for once. Everyone, fans, critics, even politicians, seemed to find their reflection in the debate. Meanwhile, inside ABC headquarters, producers scrambled. Do we edit it out? Do we air it? One asked, but by then it didn't matter. The raw footage was already everywhere. Jimmy Kimmel issued a short statement hours later, polished, neutral, safe. Mark and I have a lot of respect for each other. Things got intense. That's live TV. But the apology felt hollow. The internet doesn't forget sincerity, or the lack of it. And then came Wahlberg's post. Just a single paragraph on Instagram beneath a photo of a sunrise. Respect isn't negotiable. We can laugh, but not at what gives us strength. Grateful for the love. Grateful for the lesson. It racked up millions of likes in hours, because beyond the controversy, people felt something rare. A reminder that even in a world obsessed with spectacle, dignity can still trend. But as the storm grew louder, a quieter question began to emerge. What did this moment really mean? Days passed, but the moment refused to fade. Every talk show, podcast, and news feed replayed the clip, dissecting every pause, every expression, every breath. But Mark Wahlberg didn't respond again. He didn't need to. His silence spoke louder than any statement could. While Jimmy Kimmel returned to business as usual, monologues. Celebrity guest, polished laughter, something in the air had changed. The audience still clapped, but not quite the same way. There was a new awareness, a subtle discomfort behind the applause. Meanwhile, Mark stayed grounded. He was seen attending church with his family that Sunday, head bowed, smiling gently as cameras flashed from across the street. No press conference, no interviews, No counterattack. Just calm. Just conviction. When he finally spoke publicly a week later, it wasn't on TV, it was during a community youth event in Boston. Standing in front of a small crowd of teens, he said, "We all fall short sometimes, but we don't have to laugh at what's sacred to others to feel strong. Sometimes, the most powerful thing you can do is walk away." The audience didn't cheer. They just listened because they could feel the truth in it. Later that night, clips from his speech spread across social media. And for once, the comment sections weren't filled with sarcasm or mockery. They were filled with gratitude. People shared their own stories, moments when they'd been mocked for their beliefs, or stayed silent when they should have stood tall. The internet, that place built for noise, it found a moment of stillness. Because this wasn't about Hollywood anymore. It wasn't about fame or who was right or wrong. It was about the quiet strength it takes to hold your values when the world wants you to laugh them off. And in the echo of that moment, dignity, not drama, finally took center stage, every now and then. A single moment cuts through the noise, reminding us that character still matters more than cameras. Mark Wahlberg's walkout wasn't about ego. It was about boundaries. About standing firm when mockery becomes the norm. And remembering that respect doesn't need to shout to be heard. If this moment made you pause, if it reminded you that strength can be quiet, and integrity can still trend, then share this story. Talk about it. Let it ripple. Because maybe the real takeaway isn't about Hollywood at all. Maybe it's about us, about how we treat belief, how we define dignity, and what we're willing to defend when the spotlight turns our way. So don't just watch the drama. Be part of the message.